So before we begin, I want to introduce you to our speaker, Herman Auer. He is a Galveston County Master Gardener from the class of 1983. Since that time, he's completed a couple different trainings to become certified specialists in vegetables and propagation by the Texas Master Gardener Association. Additionally, he has been the Vice President for Educational Programs for our association, I think about 13 years total over various times throughout his tenure here. He has over 30 years of experience growing fruit trees, from managing his family's Santa Fe home with over 40 pecans, 150 peach and plum trees, and then citrus, blackberries, grapes, and a very large vegetable garden. So again, we thank you for joining us today. Herman, over to you.
Ginger, thank you very much. First of all, Master Gardeners are educators, and I personally would like to thank Ginger for taking care of the Zoom programs that we can continue to educate the public, and also with her computer expertise. Now, we will take a short break near the middle, and what I want to say right now is that we have just had a freeze, and I had some peaches that were in full bloom. They froze. The new growth is already coming back. Mid-Pride and Tex King, if they have not bloomed out, will probably bloom out later on for most people. I want to mention that in Galveston County, there are two places where there are people that are actually raising over 100 peach trees. And one is Bill Pittman out in Santa Fe, and the other one is Fruit and Such over in, I think it's called Dickinson or Texas City now, near the Dickinson Bio and 146. Okay. Now, let me see here. Okay, there. In 1968, I started trying to grow peaches. And what happened is they always died. I had peaches sitting in 6 inches of water for a week, and I couldn't understand why they didn't grow. In 1980, I became successful. It was because I understood drainage. Okay. From that time on, I grew quite a few peaches. It wasn't for the peach, it was for the experience and the knowledge. It was a challenge. We're going to cover peaches and plums, making the investment, a location, here again, drainage, and you're going to hear drainage quite often. The variety, chill hours, and rootstock. The management of pruning and shaping these trees, thinning the fruit, and we're going to cover some of the problems and some of the solutions that you may need to know later on. Okay, this photograph was taken in the Santa Fe area, okay, at our house back then. It is something that you don't see everywhere. When I first started doing my research for peaches in Galveston County, I found nothing like this. I found no trees that looked like what I thought they should look like, and I continued until I got there, until I was satisfied. The history of peaches, they originated in China. The Spaniards brought them to the Americas. In 1831, Stephen F. Austin, writing to the people who were coming to Texas, said, if you come up the Brazos, 6 miles from the coast, on the west bank is a peach thicket. Get your trees from there and take them to the homestead. There was a book one time I was reading it, and the first chapter said, in the peach orchard, I was standing and looking at Galveston Bay. So this is probably over toward the San Leon area, somewhere up in there. This is Ed Elkins. Ed is the only guy that ever really listened to me. We had a fruit tree sale in Dickinson one time, and Ed came to me with these bare root trees in a plastic bag, and they weren't even tied shut. And he says, what do I do with these trees now? I told him, go home, plant them in full sun with an airflow, because air removes moisture in the morning, preferably a garden soil if you have it. You want a raised bed. The rootstock that he used on this particular tree was Okinawa hybrid. He used a Tropic Snow, white flesh, freestone peach, 200 hours of chill. And when he planted it, he shaped it to the inverted umbrella by pruning it off at about 18 inches high. When he built this bed of 8 by 8 foot square, he raised the middle to about 18 inches. And later on, this man was extremely proud of what he had produced, and he had a right to be. Records. I recommend that you keep some kind of records, and there's a reason. Like, what variety and rootstock do you have? Some of these places, when you go out here and you buy these trees, they don't have anything at all about chill hours or rootstock because they don't know. The buyer is sitting someplace else and he's not local. Photographs are important, especially the digital, because they have dates and times on them. How you planted and pruned your tree is also important. Was it bare root, container grown? What was the condition of the roots? All activity that you see and do in reference to your trees. The activity of your neighbors. Are they spraying Roundup? What are they doing? The reason we want you to do this is because later on, when you have a problem with your tree and you call the extension office for an answer, the first question we're going to ask you is, what variety is it? Because certain varieties have certain problems. Let's talk about freeze date. See that February the 14th? There's a 50% chance of a freeze in Houston, Texas. Well, they missed it by 1 day, I believe, this year. Okay. Now, some of us have trees that are in a place called a microclimate where they're not going to be damaged as much by the freeze. When I first started growing peaches, I figured that 2 out of 10 years I would lose them because of a freeze. I don't think the odds are that low. Okay. Now, I want to talk about chill hours. All deciduous fruit crops and varieties have a specific chilling requirements. Deciduous, that's those fruit trees that lose their leaves in the winter. Now, chilling requirement. The requirement of plants for a specific period of dormancy below a particular temperature in order for them to initiate flowering. Okay, so this is chill hours. So what we mean is collectively the hours of between 32 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So when this tree goes dormant and the temperature is below 45 and above 32 degrees, the buzz on that tree is just like they have a thermometer and a clock, and they are recording the number of hours as chill hours. When they get that number of chill hours that that particular variety requires, then it will start trying to bloom. Here, we usually say we need 300 plus or minus 100 hours. When you get in a Crystal Beach, you probably need 150 hour chill peach. Galveston, same way. When you get in western and northern Santa Fe, 300 hours is very good. But these trees don't know these numbers are exact, okay? So they are subject to be flexible somewhat. Okay, now, this is a chart from Texas A&M. And what I want to show you here is that in this particular area right here, this is the zone we're in. According to A&M, we can take a 400-hour chill peach. I have a 450-hour Tex King that has not bloomed yet, but I'm hoping. Now, when it comes to chill hours, what I want to say is that if you have a chill hour peach of 200 hours that does very well here, if you take it to Dallas, that has about 800 hours of chill, it will get its chill hours probably in November. It's going to bloom and it's going to freeze. That's the end of that season. If you take that 800-hour chill peach to our area and you plant it, when it gets, and it won't get that 800-hour chill, except maybe 1 or 2 out of 10 years, okay? And what happens is the 800-hour chill peach here may not ever bloom at all, or it may only have a few blooms and very little foliage. It does not have the chill hours. Many people buy peaches or other trees from elsewhere and they don't bloom, and it's because they're high chill varieties. So chill hours is extremely important when you are selecting varieties. Okay, chilling requirements. This is just an example. The Tropic Snow peach requires about 200 hours of chill or less. The Methley plum, 200. The Anna apple, around 200. And yes, we can grow apples down here. The pineapple pear requires 150 hours of chill or less. The Mahan pecan requires 400 hours of chill, and the American grape, 100. Of course, citrus, we don't need to worry about chill hours. The chilling requirements of peaches, the ones in white are the ones that I like real well, that will work here. The Tropic Snow is 200 hours. Early Grande is 2. Florida King is 450. Tex King is 400. Tex Star is 450. I would stay away from the Tex Star because it's getting up there. The Florida Glow is 150 hours. This is one that was developed in Florida. The Mid Pride has a real advantage. It's 250 hours of chill, but when it gets its chill hours, it may sit there for some time before it blooms. So when somebody around here now has peaches at the end of June and they're yellow freestone, most likely it's that Mid Pride. The Early Amber is 250, which is very good. The Florida Prince is 150. The Tropic Beauty is down there also. Now the ones in yellow, they're high chill. I wouldn't even consider those here. Now the Tex First is a new variety that came out a year or two ago. They say there's 200 hours of chill. And like I said, my house has already bloomed out this year. So here again, 300 hours plus or minus 100. Now this is an interesting slide because the Early Amber peach at 250 hours chill, it produces about the middle of May. And this is what's important. The Early Grande, about the 1st of May. The Florida King, about the 10th of May. The Mid Pride, July the 1st and probably before that. May 15th, Tex King, Tropic Beauty, April the 26th. The Tropic Sweet, 10th of May, and late May on the Tropic Snow, late May and even into early June on the Tropic Snow. And then you have May Pride, Eva's Pride, and try the others, okay? But what makes this nice is that by the 1st of June, most of your peaches are going to be harvested already. Now, one thing I want to make mention of here is there was a girl in Glen, Florida that were raising peaches for the public. And she told me that if you're going to try to raise a peach organically, the Florida King is the one you need to try because it is the best suited with the least problems. Now we have freestone. That's when you cut that peach and it separates from the stone very freely, okay? That's what a lot of people look for. Here, we'll have more clingstone. Clingstone is the fruit that when you cut it, there's the fresh clings all the way to the stone when fully ripe. However, they have more pectin than the freestone. The Tropic Snow, that's Europe's choice. Many of the old pioneers, this was their dooryard peach. Europe loved white flesh peaches, and most of these peaches were also in the old homesteads around here. It's very sweet. It smells like a woman's perfume. It is, when I say freestone, I'm going to say almost freestone, not quite. This is the one that when you're downwind, when it's ripe, you will be able to smell it. Okay, why buy a grafted fruit tree? We want the desirable variety that we want on top of a desirable rootstock that will go well in our soil. All of the rootstock under our stone fruit has a water problem. They cannot tolerate sitting in water for a long period of time. Okay, when you purchase a grafted tree, what you're doing is you have shortened the adolescent period of the tree, which because it's grafted. Okay? That means it's going to produce quicker than if it were from a seed. LSU did a study and they planted 15,000 piece seeds. Less than 10 of them had good qualities that you could name it. and patented. Okay. Now, grafting to production. What I really want to say here is that, or really reach into, is that peaches, when they're grafted, in 3 years, they're going to start producing fruit. So when you buy a tree that's in a container, that's 1 year. The next year you buy it, that's 2 years. The next year it's going to produce peaches. However, we're going to recommend that you don't let many peaches grow, if any, because we don't want to disfigure the tree. And plums will produce in 2 years after grafting. Now, when I say shorten the adolescent period of the tree, let's look at pecans up here. It takes 7 years for them to produce after grafting. If you have 2 trees, one's grafted and one is not, the one grafted will produce pecans in 7 years with the variety, the same variety as the scion that you put on top of your tree. The one in the backyard may produce in 20, 30 years, and you will not know what it's going to produce until it actually produces. How fruit ripens. A plum will continue to ripen after it's picked off the tree. That means when it starts to turn, you pick it, you lay it on a counter, your raccoons, possums, and squirrels, birds, they can't get to it. So that is an advantage. Now, peach ripen only on the tree. That means we're going to be fighting possums, coons, squirrels, and birds. And we're going to cover some of the things that we can do to be the winner. Now, sugar in the fruit. Now, peaches have about 10% and plums have 15% or thereabouts. A location or planting location. We want to take into consideration overhead, underground power lines, and utilities. When it comes to peaches, the overhead lines, we can trim these trees where they never reach those overhead lines. How large will your tree grow? You need to take this into consideration. We want to take into consideration sidewalks, slabs, and buildings. We want an area of full sun. We want a good airflow to remove moisture in the morning because fungus is one of our biggest problems in Galveston County. We want a raised bed, 12-inch height minimum and 8 by 8 foot minimum. I've actually told people before that if you took a truckload of sand that doesn't have salt in it and dumped it and spread it out 18 inches high, let the grass cover the edges so it didn't wash away, you can add your nutrients, amend the soil, and that is a very good place for a peach tree. When it comes to drainage, we want you to think outside of the box. Thinking outside of the box might mean you put a sump pump in the yard right next to your peach tree if you want that tree bad enough. Soil, we're going to use what we got. I've used sand, loam, clay, even packed clay. Packed clay did very well, except I had a tendency to water that particular area too much. Now, we want a good water supply because we know there's times we're going to need to supplement the water to our trees. When it comes to the rootstock, that's what's in the ground. The Nemagard has been used in the commercial orchard since 1960 till present, still being used. The Florida Guard is one that comes out of Florida and it has very red leaves on it. The Guardian is another one that's used locally. They are all resistant to root knot nematode. These trees have the potential to have a taproot going down to about 7 foot deep, but in Galveston County, it may never happen because of the water. All 3 of these rootstocks are compatible with peach, plum, nectarine, almond, and apricot. There is a new variety out called MP29. It is a peach. It is developed from tissue culture. It has no taproot, and it makes a slightly smaller tree. You can graft peaches on it, but not plums. Now, if you had it and wanted to graft or wanted a plum on it, I would graft a peach on it first and then graft a plum onto the peach, and that would probably survive like that. When it comes to the growing media, the soil, it supports and anchors the roots. It's a storehouse for nutrients, organic matter, air, and water. Now, if you have some soil that is perfect, it would have about 50% solids, 25% air, and 25% moisture. So what this means is if the moisture content is 50%, that means there's no air and your tree will probably die. Now, if we use topsoil, we're going to have weeds. We want to add something to it to help break it down because most of the soil around our area is gumbo. Now, if you purchase from one of the vendors around here and it has a garden mix or a rose mix, what you have to realize is that part of that is wood chips. Wood chips add volume, more. Now, when that wood chips try to decompose, and it will, the nitrogen that's in that soil is going to take that nitrogen, tie it up, try to decompose the wood chips, and there's not much nitrogen available for your plants. That means you're going to have to supplement nitrogen right away. As the wood chips decompose, you now end up with compost. Now, when you build a bed 12 inches high, you water it in and it's still 12 inches high. As the wood chips decompose, a year later, you're going to have a 10-inch high raised bed because of the decomposition of the wood chips. Okay. At the extension office, there is a bag and paperwork where you can take a soil sample, all the instructions there. You can send this sample to A&M and they will send you back the analysis of your soil. And if you would like, you can also ask them for trace elements, the pH and the soil and the salt contents of the soil. Okay. They will also, if you tell them what you're going to plant, they will send you the recommendations of fertilization for your crop. So remember, the forms are at the extension office. And if nobody has done one in your area, it would probably be advisable for somebody to do it. When it comes to soil, we want to talk about water movement in the soil. On the left is a long teardrop. If you have sandy soil and you have a slow emitter, like 2 gallons of water an hour, that's what the water would look like in the soil because gravity pulls it down fairly quick. There's no resistance. Now on the right, in heavy gumbo, an emitter putting out that same amount of water would have a tendency to balloon because the soil is heavy. What this means is if you are in sandy soil, you want more emitters for a shorter period of time. But on heavy soil, you can use less emitters for a longer period of time. When it comes to the fertilizer that we're going to use, most of us use a granular fertilizer. And that fertilizer, 2 cups equals about a pound. We don't want anything with a weed killer in it. If we have some 15, 5, 10 in the garage that we use for the yard, that's good, as long as there is no weed killer in it. Okay, when we put out the fertilizer, nitrogen leaches. This is why we put out more than one application, because if you put the nitrogen out and you get a large rain, the nitrogen will leach, and in sandy soil, it can get below your roots pretty quick. So a light application, many of them will work better than one heavy application. Also, you don't have this flood pushing your fertilizer out into the bayou. The phosphorus is stable in the soil. Your potassium does move some, but not much. If a person uses a triple 13, that's 13% nitrogen, over a period of time, the middle number will build up in your soil and act as a poison to your plants. So we don't want to use that forever. The 15-5-10 works very well. The 2100 is sulfur, is 2100 nitrogen with sulfur. Now with pecans, that lowers the pH of the soil and brings the pH down where you want it on pecan. The 4600 is urea. It is in that form available for your plants to use immediately. The other fertilizer has to be nitrogen, has to be broke down by the microorganisms in your soil so that your plants can use it. Now, trace elements, do your soil sample first before you do anything with the trace elements. The water and fertilizer. When I was growing 100, 150 peach trees, and if it was not moist, if there was no rain or moisture there, I would water these trees once a week or once every 10 days with a very good soaking. I used emitters with no electronics. I would turn it on, let it run all night long. The next morning you go out there and there's water everywhere. So you turn it off for 7 to 10 days. Now the tree roots are going to go down as deep as they can. Now, at the beginning, we talked about Ed's tree that he did very well with. I went there one time and some of his limbs were disfigured. They were growing exceptionally fast. And I asked him, I said, what are you fertilizing your tree with? He told me he was using a 15-30-15 water-soluble fertilizer, and he was doing it every 1 or 2 weeks. Now, I'm not recommending that, but you have to look at his success. If you're going to put down a half a pound of 4600 per inch of trunk on your tree, what you would like to do is divide it in 3 applications. 1 application just before it blooms, another application in 2 or 3 weeks, and then a couple of 3 weeks, put the other application down. If you're not getting enough growth, you can always supplement more. Now, if you're using 4600, you need to water it in because it will volatilize. The higher the temperature, the quicker it will volatilize, evaporate into the air. As summer pruning, you're going to see this later on, a half a pound of 4600 per inch of trunk diameter. You put it down at that time. What we're shooting for is 12 inches of new growth at that particular time, and that's after Memorial Day. More fertilizer if needed, none after July 1. However, there might be times we need to add extra. Also, trees do respond to stress. Lack of water, fertilizer could be stress. Here we go, drainage again. Okay. When it rains, and you're standing in the kitchen and you're looking at that spot in the yard that you can still see the grass, that's surface water. We want to get rid of all of that after it rains. When it quits raining, now you have water that's in the soil that's just sitting there and your tree roots are in that water. What we really need is a soil or a raised bed so that the water that's in that soil can percolate away from the roots so we get that 25% moisture level in there. Now, the next slide is, this is the 5-year-old rootstock that was sitting in a 12-inch raised bed. Actually, the raised bed probably had a little bit more advantage than 12 inches, but I wanted to take the tree out. So what I want to show you is that right about here is the level it was in the soil. The roots were going out real good, but if you look down, there's not any tap roots in there because even though this is a raised bed, this thing, the tap root is not going to set in water. Okay, this is in Santa Fe. There's a bed on the left and one on the right. In the wintertime, after it rained, 24 hours after that rain, the differential in the water in the bottom of the road, bottom in the bed right here, and here it was 12 inches differential. So that means this is like a very long raised bed and the water percolates through the soil to the ditch and drains out. When the second levee was put on the right, this was 18 inches higher. So in the winter, 24 hours after rain, the water level and the crest of the bed was 18 inches. The main thing that I saw is these trees were able to get larger on the right. They produced their peaches only a few days ahead of time or sooner than the ones on the left, but it worked very good. Now, This is the tree by itself, and generally speaking, if you take pretty good care of your tree, the width or the drip system will be about 14 to 16 feet. That's a pretty good size tree. That tree, one tree, if you take care of it, can produce well over 200 pounds of peaches in a growing season. Now, this is the same 2 road beds, and if you notice, there's grass underneath the trees. I know that grass uses nitrogen and water, but I also believe that that matted grass in there helps to hold the soil in place. And to me as a gardener, the soil is the most expensive thing out there. I broadcast the fertilizer out and water it in. This photograph is the 25th of May, 2003. Buying your tree. We want to know the rootstock, the variety, and the chill hours. Regardless of where you're going, you need to have this already written down, because you're going to find out a lot of these stores and places, they're not real honest sometimes. So you got a rootstock that you want, you got a variety you want on top, and you want the chill hours, okay? Now, when you buy these, if you buy these bare root, and if you come from a mail order from a nursery, it'll probably be bare root, okay? And it will be a whip. A whip will be a tree that will be anywhere from 3 feet to 5 or 6 feet. It will have a few small limbs coming off of it, but you can tell that whip actually grew in 1 year. You want to keep the roots moist. Okay. If they are container bound, I mean, if they're in a container, they might be root bound. Now, let me say something about this container grown. If the bark is gray, that means, or graying, that means that tree is 2 years old in that container. Whereas a whip is normally a 1-year-old tree. If you get the wrong tree in 3 years, you will know. Now, if you're buying from California, and in a lot of their catalogs, they list them as high chill, low chill, and low chill. What we're normally looking for in our area is the low chill peach. You only need one because they are self-fertile. You don't need a pollinator. Plums, some needs pollinators and some don't. So when you buy your plum, don't throw them labels away, and remember which one is which in the yard. Because if you lose the pollinator, that means you need another one, or figure some other way to make sure there's a pollinator there. And where you buy your tree does matter. When you buy your bare root trees, what you can do is take them and heel them in. That means you open the soil up, you lay them in there, you cover them up with moist soil, and they'll stay there temporarily while you can do things or get ready to do whatever you need to do. If you bought them and they're in a plastic bag, what you would like to do, and if you're going to set them in a plastic bag for a day or two, put them in the garage away from the sun. Make sure there's just enough moisture in there to keep them moist, and they'll hold up for a while. If they are container grown, ants will probably be your biggest problem if they're sitting around temporarily, because those ants like those high spots out of the water. When it comes to planting bare root trees, I like a hole large enough to accommodate the roots. Now, sometimes you get a long root out there, cut it off because you don't need 100% of it. Now, in wet soil, when you dig your hole, when you look at the edge of it, there might be slick sides. And what you want to do is do something to scar or scrape those slick edges, because what you don't want is you don't want that tree root growing up to that slick surface and then turning and making a circle. You want it to continue to grow out away from the center of the tree. If you have, you can prune your long and broken roots if you want to. Now, sometimes with the bare root, we'll let it soak. If you're in question about how deep to plant it, when you pull it up out of the water, there'll be a line just above the roots, and it'll tell you where it was growing in the soil. That's the water test. And also, quite often, what you'll see is the roots on the rootstock usually start about an inch below the soil line because they are planted from seeds. If there is a taproot, the tree was started from a seed. I like to fill the hole with water. Sometimes that's not possible. I'm going to insert the tree roots. I'm going to backfill it with the same soil in the reverse order. So what came out last goes back in first. I want to remove all the air pockets. I will, if there's clods in there, and you try to take your fingers and try to work it in. If you know there's still air pockets in there, take in some sand and wash it in. You want to get rid of all of those air pockets. And there's other things you can probably use besides sand to remove those air pockets. When you get through, let's put a water ring, stake your tree if needed. If you prune your tree to 18 inches high, you won't need a stake. There's nothing there for the wind to blow against. We want to water today, tomorrow, and the next day. And we want to water it occasionally to make sure it has moisture on its roots, because we don't want the roots to dry out. Now you notice I have said nothing at all about fertilizer in the hole. Fertilizer is acidic, it will burn your roots and can kill your tree. Okay, when it comes to planting, this tree right here was a Nemagard rootstock that was grown in the garden. It was grafted right here, so we have Tropic Snow on top of a Nemagard. Now, what I also want to show you right here is, see where my finger is? That's the depth it's going to go back into the soil. Now, if you look up here, see that bark is bronze. I call it bronze anyhow. That is 1-year-old wood. And we're going to talk more about 1-year-old wood because bronze bark is important because we want to produce some scaffold limbs, and the scaffold limbs will come out of that wood very easy. Now, on the right, he is showing where the graft is. Now, when it comes to planting these trees, if they're too deep or too shallow, A&M says it can impact the yield of your tree. So we want to try to get it as close as we can to the right depth in the soil. Now, let's look at this photograph right here again. And if you look, this is a volcano of soil. They weren't ready for it. So we built a volcano, kind of packed it down a little bit, dug a hole in the top of it, and planted that tree. All we did was buy them time to fill in the rest of the soil around here. We're not talking about wait until next year. This year, let's do it. Let's do it pretty quick, okay? But we bought them some time. Now, 18 inches high. Now, this is a little too tall, but this is in another organization's garden. And this guy's from the Bronx, and he just doesn't want to cut it that shallow or short. But anyhow, this is the tree when he gets through. Now, the reason we cut that off like that, if you look at the photograph on the right, this is an inverted umbrella. If we prune this tree, this is what's going to happen. We're going to get these scaffold limbs off of here. What this means over here is his scaffold limbs are going to come off here. These are a little lower. And when you look at the fence in the backyard, I want this thing to produce its fruit as close to the ground as I can. Okay. Now, if you're a tall person, you may want to do the reverse. Pruning and planting. Okay. Remove the label, record the information for future use, and let's cut $15 off the top of your $25 tree. When we were selling bare root trees, this was kind of like a joke because nobody wanted this done. They bought a tree that was 6 feet tall. They wanted to take every bit of it home. And then when they learned something a couple of years later, they said, can I cut it off now? So I usually recommend cutting it off 18 inches or pretty close. Remove all the twigs because there might be a twig or two on it, and we want those out of the way. What we've done, one, we have balanced the top of the tree with the root system. And we would like to shoot for, used to A&M recommended 3 scaffold limbs, now they recommend 6, because when you divide the weight of that tree by 3 or by 6, the scaffold limb, the tree with 6 limbs, you're going to have less breakage. Okay. when this tree starts to grow, we want to remove all of the growth below the graft. And when I say that, you might do it every 2 or 3 days sometimes. Okay, now if you want to, you can wrap the trunk just below the graft with foil, because those suckers off the trunk won't come out if they don't have sunlight. Not pruning back the tree at planting is perhaps the greatest cause of tree failure. Now, when you get in the pecan growing area, A&M recommends you cut off 1/3 of the top of the tree. The man with the money that's paying for these trees, paying to plant them, cuts half the top off because he wants to be successful. He does not want to replace any tree there, because anything he replaces cost him extra money. Now, the public, in a lot of cases, don't know how to plant a bare root tree. They don't know how to take care of it. So the nursery industry has decided the public is dumb. So we're going to put these trees in pots. It's easier for them to handle. So this tree right here is in a container, and I'll tell you this, it's a 2-year-old tree. Now, in order to plant this, okay, let me start like this. The nurseryman who is going to sell you this tree bought this tree a year ago from California, and it was already grafted. It's probably about 5 feet tall. He takes that tree, and he takes this container right here, and he sets it in there. And because the roots are too big, he's going to cut some of them off. Some of these I've opened up, found that they didn't cut them off. They just crammed them in there and broke them up. But if they cut the roots off, set it in there, add the soil, water and fertilizer for a year now, they set it in a row. They cut it off about 4 feet high, which now it's going to make his scaffold limbs at 4 feet high, and that's too high for me or whatever. And this tree is going to grow. Now, when we purchase it, we need to do something. This is root bound. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a box cutter or something. We're going to cut these roots right here on at least 4, 5, 6 slides. Okay. Now this bark here is beginning to gray a little bit, which means it's got some age. Okay, on this tree right here, let me see, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, bark color. Reason I mentioned gray bark is because it has a problem. It can't put out enough new growth to produce all the scaffold limbs we would like to have. So this is a tree that's probably about 3 years old in the ground. It could be transplanted if a person wanted to, because it's weak at the roots here. Okay, so what I would do or could do is 18 inches up, cut the tree off. Water and fertilizer, and that tree from above the graft, we want to produce 6 scaffold limbs, but that's not going to happen. But if it does produce 1 bud, and that one bud turns upward, we would then like to do something to support it growing upward, but not break it off. And when that one little piece of light green wood gets to be about 12 inches tall, we're going to take our fingernail and we're going to take the tip out of it to stop it from growing straight up. At this time, that little 12-inch stick will now produce the scaffold limbs that we're looking for to produce an inverted umbrella tree. Now, bronze bark, you usually don't have that problem, but with gray bark, it's very likely. That container grown that I was trying to get ahead of myself on, we want to build a hole large enough to accommodate the roots. Okay? In wet soil, we're going to scar the edge of the hole if necessary. What you can do is take that container, dig your hole, set it in there where it's pretty close, then cut the container off, and then I would cut the outside roots and set it in that hole. That's the least I would do. If you don't do that, your chances of failure later on is pretty high. We want to prune those roots so that the roots continue to go out, not in a circle. We want to insert that tree in a hole at the correct level and maybe an inch or two higher. We want to backfill the soil in reverse order again. We want to water today, tomorrow, and the next day, and don't forget to cut it back. We want to cut this back at probably about 18 inches. No fertilizer in the hole because the acid burns the roots. This is why we want to anchor those trees well. This is kind of like a funeral, you know. This tree is probably 6, 7 years old. And now, if you try to pull it up, it really never comes out well. And you see them guys' head, they're bowed. Oh, that's terrible. Okay, let's talk about training that tree. This is an aerial view, and basically, and there's the trunk right in the center. And here we have 6 scaffold limbs. And this one over here is what they're all going to look like later on. So this limb is going to go out, and we're going to let 3, hopefully, limbs grow out from the end. And these limbs are going to be almost level. These are going to be a 75-degree angle. These are going to be almost level. And we're going to divide the weight between the 6. Okay, now, this is what the tree would look like from the side. So here we have a raised bed. We have a trunk that's about 18 inches high. And these are scaffold limbs, and they're going to go off at about a 75-degree angle. And if you'll take the time to measure them, they'll probably be about 7 feet tall or 7 feet long. And then you see these limbs out in. These are the scaffold limbs. This is where most of your fruit is going to be produced. Okay? So this is basically an open center. Okay? Now, we said 75 degrees. And the reason is, this tree right here is less than 75 or greater, whatever you want to call it. But anyhow, this is pretty flat. And when I first started this, well, I wanted flat limbs to make a big, large, beautiful tree. I want the best there is. But I've screwed up. This is facing north. And in the wintertime, when it's cold and the sun at the angle where it is setting strikes the bark on that tree, and it's hot, it will and can, on larger limbs, kill the cambium layer on the top of that limb. Hope you got that. Now, over here on the right is one of those limbs that's got some size to it. And if you look on the bottom, the cambium layer is still intact and fluid is still moving. On the top, the sun killed the cambium layer. It is decomposing. It is getting weaker and weaker. And eventually, with the load on the weight of that limb, this limb is going to, they really don't break, they just kind of lay down. And if they lay down with fruit on them, let it stay, harvest your fruit, and then you can cut the limb off. When it comes to fruit, thinning the fruit. If your tree is going to produce a certain amount of pounds, it can produce little fruit or large fruit, your choice. On the second year your tree grows, I would suggest you, if you're growing peaches before, don't produce any that year. Now, if this is your first year with peaches, I would let a couple grow, 2 or 3, near the center of the tree, because we don't want the weight of those peaches to disfigure your tree. Okay? Those few peaches in the center, as you watch them through the year, you will know or understand what problems you will have the next year when it has more peaches. Okay? Okay. If your tree is going to produce lots of peaches, small or large, your choice. A lot of people don't want to prune their trees because June drop is coming. June, we've already got our peaches harvested. The wind is blowing against a round surface, so it's not much pressure. I've gone out after a high wind and found 1 or 2 peaches on the ground. It's usually something that was slapping, and eventually it came off. We want to thin this fruit to about 6 inches apart on the tree. If we want them a little larger, let's go to 7 or 8 inches. You want to do this when they're smaller than the size of a dime, and we want to roll them off. Commercial growers use a rubber hose and beat the trees, but our tree means more to us. So when I say roll them off, You don't take that piece you want to take off and roll it up or down the limb. You roll it against the edge and it'll roll off real easy. So whatever your tree is going to produce, it'll produce the same number of pounds, but less. Now, when a tree is growing peaches, and then it goes to a point where the fruit stops growing, you start worrying about it, or you continue to watch it. In a week or so, it'll start growing again. At that time, you want to make sure there's adequate water, because a lot of a peach is water. A&M says your tree should have 600 peaches. If they're a third of a pound, what's that, about 200 pounds if my math is correct? If they're 2¼ inches in diameter, that only takes 79 to fill up a 48-pound bushel basket. 191 peaches is a lot of peaches though, but I prefer the larger ones. This is an example of thinning. Up on the top left, this is a Tropic Snow. Tropic Snow sets very, very heavy. We know that tree cannot handle that. So what we did is we took the leaves off of this one. Then we went down here and we removed the fruit off of it. And you notice that limb now has 4 peaches on it. 3 would probably be better, but we left 4. Now up on the top right, these are little peaches coming off of a tree. We were asked to count these, and we looked at them and we said, oh, there's about 1,000 there, okay? Now, when you're thinning these peaches, getting rid of this excess, you also want to look at some others. This is a twin. This is caused by low temperatures. Anything on that tree that has flaws on it or doesn't look right, take it off. Something may have already stung these things. The location. Sometimes when you're removing these, you might find out that if I leave this one and it gets heavy, is it going to rub someplace? We don't want those rubbing peaches, because that peach that's been rubbing, we're not going to be able to use it anyhow. Now, as your trees are growing and they get near harvest, if you get a lot of rain, let's say like if you haven't had a lot of water and then you get a lot of rain, and a lot of rain, the skin cannot expand fast enough on these peaches and the skin will split. The same thing happens to tomatoes and tight-skinned citrus. So we want to make sure we have good even watering all the way along. Now this is called split pit. It's caused by uneven watering. Now, if you look at this peach, there is actually a hole in the top while it's attached to the tree. Split pit. Now, I've taken these and looked to see how much of that peach could you save, and it wasn't worth saving anything, so I threw it away. Okay. So like I said, uneven watering, so we want that even watering if at all possible. When it comes to the harvest, commercially, peaches are harvested color ripe. What that means is a yellow flesh peach has a green background, and when that green background starts to turn yellow, it is now color ripe. That's when they're going to pick it, put it in a box, and send it to the market. Now, the depth of these peaches in a container, if they're color ripe, you can probably stack them pretty high. But if they're tree ripe, you need to be careful of bruising. I've known people that would pick peaches and take them to a farmer's market, and they would put them in an ice chest with an ice slurry so that they wouldn't bruise and they would keep that peach from continuing to ripen, okay? Yellow flesh peaches storage. In the refrigerator, a yellow flesh peach, according to the public, will hold up about 2 weeks real well. And the white flesh peach in the refrigerator will hold up about 3 weeks. Buds and spurs. Now, peaches produce on buds, plums, apples, and pears produce on spurs. Now, okay, when we summer prune our peaches, we do that to produce new wood for next year's blooms. Peaches bloom on 1-year-old wood. If you go out there later on and you look at your tree and you got these kind of a bright orange limbs, there are buds on there that are going to bloom next year. The one that has bloomed this year is not going to bloom next year. However, there might be times where you want to leave that limb to fill up a void in or around the tree. So summer pruning, severe, produces new wood. Plums bloom on 1-year-old wood and spurs. So the new growth on your plum this year should have some blooms, but down in your tree, you're going to have a lot of these little short limbs that's got spurs on them. On a plum tree, that's where most of your plums are going to be. On a plum tree, you might want to control the size and the shape of your tree, but you're going to leave a lot of those small limbs that have spurs on them. And also, you want to remove the limbs that are growing toward the center of the tree. On plum trees, sometimes you'll have a limb on one side that grows a limb facing all the way back to the other side. If you don't need them for graft wood, cut them out. Okay. Okay, on the left here, this is when I cut the wood in the spring. And if you look right here, there's 3 buds right there. The bud in the center is going to produce foliage. It's a pointed bud. The 2 on the outside are round points. They're going to bloom. Now, if you look on the right here and look a little closer, the one in the middle is foliage. The one on the outside is blooms. And we prune these trees to make them produce buds. We actually control the bud producing process on these trees. Now, I'm fixing to go through 3 slides that I'm standing in the same position and looking at that little building through the tree. Now, this is a tree in the orchard at the extension office. If you know, this is June the 11th. Normally, I do a lot of pruning on Memorial Day weekend. It just works out real well for me. So this tree needs to be pruned. It takes about 15 minutes for me to do it because I've done a lot. And if I wasn't experienced, what I would do is I would make a couple of cuts, especially the height of the tree, start bringing the height down. And it's like a carpenter. You want to measure twice before you cut once, okay? So we're going to cut the pruning. Now, this is the tree after pruning. See all the trash on the ground? Here are the scaffold limbs. See these hanger limbs? They're pretty long out there, but they still look good. You notice that limb that was laying out here? We've gotten rid of it, you know? Now, a lot of people think, oh, this is crazy. Well, we have a purpose. With water and fertilize and the sunlight striking the bark, more new wood will grow. Now, when we prune this tree, you notice there's these limbs right here would probably go ahead and bloom next spring. There's a few of those. I have seen times when I pruned a tree where there was almost none of that there, but that's okay. Now, water and fertilizer. This is the 6th. This is the June 6th. Now, this is 40 days later, same tree, photographed in the same position. Now, most of this growth here is already 12 to 18 inches in height. In reality, that is adequate. But we're going to get more between now and the end of the year. This is a hard thing for people to do, but it is necessary. So we're producing that 1-year-old wood for next year. When it's 1 year old, it's going to bloom for us. And here's plum tree. See where all the fruit is right down here? And you can tell all these twigs up here. This is where most of the fruit is right here. So let's do a little bit of work on it. Now, you notice how the top is reduced? See all this well, I call it trash in here? That's got a lot of spurs on it. That's what's going to produce the spurs, going to produce the fruit. And if you do have some of these other long limbs in there, they may have buds on them and produce also. Now, plums on the left have spurs, and so do pears on the right. Container grown. Bonanza is a dwarfed peach. You can even use a full-size tree in like a 55-gallon container, but you may have to prune it to control the size of it. The container, I would say a 55-gallon drum. The color of the drum is important because if it's black, it's going to heat up quite a bit from the sunlight if it gets sunlight. When you fertilize and water this tree, you water, and you may have to water twice a day sometimes. You want to fertilize and add your nutrients. If your leaves turn yellow or something, that's probably high salts in the soil. That means you need to lay a water hose in there, wash all the salts out of the soil, and then fertilize it for the next year. Nectarines are a fuzzless peach. The disadvantage that I see is if you're trying to spray an insecticide, the insecticide doesn't adhere to a slick surface because the nectarine has no fuzz on it. That means you're going to add extra surfactant to it, to your chemical. Sun Racer 250 hours white flesh peach seems to do pretty well in our area. The almond, this is almond that will produce probably about 1 in every 10 years. They're really not worth doing it or spending the money on unless you're one of these people that, oh, I got to just try it. Apricot, once in every 10 years. This is a Blendheim, 500 hours of chill. This is in South Shore Harbor. They haven't proved to me yet that they're any good, so I'm going to save my money and not buy them. Okay, we're going to cover the Japanese plums. When a group of people evaluate plums, what they do is they check for how sweet is the flesh. And then they go into how bitter is the skin. Because quite often the skin on a lot of your plums are real bitter, okay? Also, on plums, some need pollinators and some don't. If you have a peach that needs a pollinator, and you have the pollinator, they must bloom at the same time. And that is very important. Now, if you have a tree that needs a pollinator, and if you know what the pollinator is, you can graft that pollinator into your other tree. And as long as you have both varieties there, the bees can do their job, okay? Now, I mentioned before that when we do our pruning on the plum, we do a lot less pruning than we do on the peaches. And we do have some limbs that will bloom on last year's wood, and some of them are spurs, and we need those spurs. Now, on some of the plums out there, Beauty is a 250 self-fruitful plum. Now, the Methley is 200 hours. The Burgundy is 250 to 550, self-fruitful. Both of these are self-fruitful. Now, the Santa Rosa is a self-fruitful. I have actually grown it in Santa Fe, and you may not have fruit every year because of the chill hours, but as you get further north and west, it'll probably do better yet. Now, I was for a long time looking for plums that did very, very well in Galveston County, and I had a lot of difficulty finding that. But these 4 plums right here are probably the best that I think there is. The Gulf Rose is 250 hours, Gulf Blaze 275, Gulf is 250, and the Gulf Beauty is 225. The Scarlet Beauty is 150. The Scarlet Beauty does not need a pollinator. It does very well. There are quite a few master gardeners that have this in their backyards. Now, on the Gulf series here, the Gulf Rose, the Gulf Blaze, and the Gulf Beauty, each one of them needs a pollinator. So any combination of these 3, any combination of 3 will work. So, and what happens is the Gulf Blaze actually starts blooming first, and about a week later, the Gulf Rose will start blooming, and about a week later, the Gulf Beauty will start blooming. So if you plant any combination of the 2, will work. However, the Gulf Rose is beautiful. It's a good flavor. The other 2 are plums, and they work very well in our area. Now, this is a photograph of the Beauty on the right, the Gulf Beauty on the left. There's the Gulf Rose and the Gulf Blaze. Now, if you look at the Gulf Beauty, the skin on the very left, see them little nicks in that skin? That's probably caused from June bugs, probably. Now, this is Scarlet Beauty. Gene Spiller, this is one of his photographs from his backyard. And it does very, very well in our area. Now, this is a photo op. I said, I want that photograph. So this is the May the 12th in the Master Gardener Orchard. There are blackberries. There are, I think, 3 kinds of plums and peaches here. And a lot of our vegetable, or not vegetable, the fruits, about mid-May is there in production real well. Okay, now this particular plum tree never produced a plum, but I never found a pollinator for it. Had I found a pollinator, I would graft it in the tree. Now, if you have a plum that blooms like this, you don't get the fruit. What you do is when your tree is blooming, you go through the neighborhood, you find somebody who's got a plum tree, and you ask for a couple of twigs, maybe 3 or 4 feet long, put them in a bucket of water and hang it in your tree. If you have bees and then you have little plums later on, what this could mean is that this is the pollinator. So then you go back and get the pollinator, get wood from that pollinator tree and graft it into your tree. Now you only need 1 tree, but don't cut the pollinator out. Okay. Bird damage. Birds can destroy quite a bit of fruit. At one time, we went from no damage when we started to about 80% bird damage, and I had to do something to stop it, and I did. On the right, that's a white flesh peach. This little old lady that I knew says no bird's going to get that, so she used that sock to cover the peach up. Now, this, if you go to some of the box store, they have this material. It's about a 1 by 1 inch plastic material, and these are usually 14 by 14 square. Now, this is an example of what you could do with 5 squares of this material. Now, I bought a piece of this material that was 3,000 feet long, 26 feet wide, and I fixed it up where I could cover 150 trees. I would walk under the net and go to every tree there and stay under the netting. No bird was ever able to get under that netting again. So we went from 85% damage by birds to no damage. I have seen on this net, because it's at the ground and it's way down, I've actually seen raccoons on top of it trying to get in, and they couldn't figure out how to. One time a bird actually got underneath there. You wet him down with a water hose and you can pick him up and do what you want to. I usually like to put this netting over there about 2 weeks before the fruit is ripe, because I don't want the squirrels to know what's underneath there, because they're the one that can do the most damage. What this is here, this is like a box. And underneath this corner right here, there is a 5/8 rebar, 5 feet long, in the ground about 18 inches. So every corner has got that. This is a 10-foot joint of PVC. And this netting has like a pigtail. So it ties here, slip it over the tree, and it does very well. And then there was one in the middle to keep the netting off the top of the leaves. If you have this netting laying on your trees, about every week, go in there and kind of push it up, because the limbs that are going through the tree, if they get too large, you may have to cut them out. But just raise it up. Now, if you have a large sheet of this and you're going to put it over a peach tree, if there's no dead limbs on your peaches, once you get it started over, it will flow over real smooth. Beautiful. Plums is different. Plums have all these little things that hang up, and it's almost impossible. I like to work my netting by myself, regardless of how big it is, because nobody will take care of my net as well as I will. This netting is very, very well worth it. These guys break your limbs. They leave seeds under the seeds under the tree, and the squirrels run off with the fruit. Okay, some of us are going to ask about a peach tree board. The peach tree borer activity is about 1 inch below the surface of the soil to about 18 inches above the soil. If they interrupt the fluid flow in the cambium layer, your tree can die. On the right here, right by that little edge, that's where the cambium layer flows. If a borer comes in there and cuts all the way around through that cambium layer, he can kill your tree. Or if it's in one limb, he can kill one limb. Now, if you think you have borers and you have sap oozing from the lower part of the tree, take the sap in your fingers and see if there's any frass or wood chips in it. If there are wood chips in it, it could be a borer. You can also take, if you have that, try to get a soft piece of wire and stick in there and see if you can kill him. Now, for control, there's a lot of different ways. One of the ways people control your peaches from borers is they use a white interior latex paint, 50% paint, 50% water. They will add an insecticide to that paint and paint the tree from about 18 inches up to the ground. I've also heard that just the white paint seems to help control the peach tree borer. On your plum limbs especially, you'll have out toward the end of them, the sap will be oozing. It's called gummosis. It's kind of like stress. On those, it's recommended that you just cut that limb out because you're going to have plenty of limbs out there anyhow. So we're going to use as least amount of chemical as possible. When it comes to the plum curculio, this is the guy you're all going to hate. The egg is laid on the fruit, leaving a crescent-shaped scar, a little bitty moon. This looks more like a weevil, and we're going to get into him a little bit more, and you should have a piece of literature that describes his activity. I was scouting for plum curculio, and what I did is I took a sheet, and it's better if somebody works with you. And if you take that sheet and suspend it up underneath like a fourth or a fifth of the tree, cool of the morning, you beat that limb like you're trying to break it. The shock will cause these little plum curculio to fall off in your sheet. You wad it up and then lay it on the ground and open it up and count them if they're there. Now, this crescent-shaped scar on that plum is plum curculio. It also affects your peaches, but more so on plums. Now, when we shook that tree and see that striped sheet, see that little guy right there? That's a plum curculio. And when you knock him off, what happens, occasionally one will fly off. Most of the time, they kind of play dead like a possum. And if you give them a minute or so, they'll start moving around. You almost don't have to look for them. What we did is we would pick them up, we would count them, put them in a bottle and stuff like that. But this right here is that plum curculio. If you look real close, see here, there are bumps on his back. It's not smooth surface. So this is that plum curculio. This is the guy you're going to be looking for. It's kind of like anything else. You got to get your eyes adjusted for it, and then you can find them. Now, this is the worm that we want to control. If the plum curculio lays its egg, and then you get a worm, most of the time this fruit's going to fall. And if it's the first generation and the fruit's small, a lot of it's going to fall. And sometimes these worms will just fall out into the ground. They will pupate. They will come back as another generation. So if you have some way to control them when they hit the ground, you may not have a second generation, because the second generation is probably, it's going to be pretty rough, because quite often the fruit will be maybe ripe at that particular time. So what we did in the orchard, okay, the plum curculio, after a few days of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, they become active. So we scouted for plum curculio in the orchard the 4th of March, and we had 1 plum curculio. But our sheet was only under about a fifth of the tree, so in reality, there was probably 5 in the tree. On the 12th of March, we did it again, same results. On the 17th of March, there was 24 plum cuculio in about a fourth or a fifth of the tree. So that means there were probably well over 100 in that tree at that time. Now, on the 27th of March, there was 3. On the 28th, we found no plum cuculio for 50 days. On the 20th of May, the second generation started back. We did not use any control, and the reason being is because this is in the orchard. It's more of a public place, and we didn't want to contaminate the fruit. Now, if it were in my orchard at the house, what I would do is look at the fruit, see when's it going to be ready. If I use malathion, I got a 7-day waiting period, and I know that if I spray 7 days and the fruit's going to be ready in 3, I know that fruit will hang on that tree that other 4 days. Now, if a person were to really go into this and study this, there's probably a way that you could take all of these out, or hopefully collect them in the sheet, and they're never left, any of them left on your tree. That would be a way to control them. I haven't done that and got that for you. Okay, some trees have shot hole. The Tropic Snow is subject to shot hole, and what it is, you'll see they look like somebody shot this with a shotgun, little red spots, and they're going to fall out. That's really not the bad part. The bad part is, as your peaches grow and they get up to, say, golf ball size, and you get to all these days of wet rain constantly, high humidity, you'll find places on some of your peaches that sap will ooze out. First time I come across this, I had trees and a fruit that maybe 15, 20, maybe more places the sap was oozing out of the fruit. It's a fungus. Now, later on, I sprayed with a fungicide, and when the fruit was harvested, there was no appearance of any damage at all to the fruit. So I had to control it with a fungicide. Okay, the leaf-footed bug, most of our fruit will never see a leaf-footed bug except those that come out in June. Okay, and also this one right here is from rubbing. This is one we missed when we were doing the thinning. Also, this right here is cat facing. It's like an insect stings your fruit. The fruit continues to grow except where the sting was. When you're doing your thinning, if you see these, get rid of them. Now, when you're spraying your tree, if you're spraying it from one side, you may see this on the back side. That means next year, you need to make sure you have good or better coverage. Okay, this one here is called freckles. Freckles is only an appearance problem. It is a fungus. If you peel that peach, it's beautiful. Now on the right, this is brown rot. This is the killer. We know with our high humidity, the fungus is coming. So we're going to spray for it every time we hopefully think we need it. This is one, when you pick this today, and it's nice and looks real good, you lay it on the counter, tomorrow morning it's rotten. That's what we don't want. This is why we use a fungicide. Okay, webworms. I only seen webworms one time, but they're low enough in the tree you can take your hand and pull them out. I've never had any aphids on peach trees at all. Okay, scale. Scale can kill your tree. Scale sucks fluid from the bark of the tree. It can kill it. To me, there's 2 stages. One, it looks like kind of like an oyster shell. That's when it's like kind of like dormant, like oyster shell. Now, at this stage, what I've done is I've taken oil. Oil smothers. You can use a dormant oil, or I have used in occasions taken a burnt peanut oil in a rag. If it's not over the whole tree, only parts of the tree, I would use that dormant oil to cover the stuff, because when it can't breathe, it's going to die. You can also use 7 or vegetable oil. There is a San Jose scale, which is the worst. You have the white peach scale. I've known people that if it's not real bad on their tree, they sit there with a pocket knife and scrape it off because they know it will kill your tree. There's a time when the scale is actually moving. It's able to move on your tree, and it doesn't look like scale at all. Okay. And then later on, it's attached to the bark. It's pulling that fluid from the tree. This is when I would use the oil. Now here you could use 7 or malathion if you wanted to. I've done it before and wiped the tree and then come back a little later and see that, well, I missed a spot, so I do it over again, okay? But you want to make sure that they are dead. Protection, if you got a peach tree in the yard, you got this guy with a weed eater, and you planted that tree out there a couple weeks from now, that weed eater, one time around it, your tree is dead, except for the rootstock coming back. And we don't want that. So let's do something. And they don't listen to you, so you might well not tell them. So you probably put a fence or something around there to protect that tree. And we don't want any volcanoes. We want airflow up to right where it's supposed to be in the soil, because we don't want any fungus problems on our trees. This is our goal. This right here looks like they're maybe not thinned as well as they should. These limbs are very pliable. They will droop. And this is when you can call your neighbor over, your other master gardener friend, and say, hey, come looky here. Okay. When it comes to pesticides, some are contact and some they have to consume. Systemic, I don't even consider that. So the insecticide that's going to take care of our insects, our fungicide are the two that we're really going to be the most interested in, okay? I'm going to suggest you definitely read the label. I have, and I've known other people. One guy bought a 2.5 gallon container of insecticide he was going to use on his pecans, took it home, sat down in the garage and read the label and decided he would never use it because it was too bad. Okay? So read it in the store, because if you don't need it, you can leave it there. And labels change at times. One chemical may have a label that gives you certain things, and the same manufacturer 2 years later might change that label on you. So you might need to read it again. This is the dormant oil. This can be used when the trees are dormant. This kills or smothers anything that might be on that tree. Read the label, because there is a temperature range at which you can use this, okay? And it acts by smothering eggs and things like that. I never seem to get to use this because the trees have leaves and the next day they're blooming. So I don't get there. This is an organic insecticide, spinosad. You can use it for borers and on a lot of things. Also on some of your fruiting trees. I have not used this, but I would definitely look and read the label, because this might be considerably better than 7 or malathion. Okay. Now, fungicide. Okay, this is Daconil 2787. The last time I read the label, you can use this at velvet tip, pink bud, and full bloom. But once the fruit develops, you cannot use this. And before the fruit develops, you can use it 3 applications per season. But here again, I don't usually get there. Do not use it after split shot. This is the one I use the most of. This is Captan. It's a fungicide. It is a wettable powder. Okay, you can use this anytime, including up to the day of harvest. Strawberries, they put a fungicide on them too. Now, because it is a wettable powder, if you're going to use this, and you can mix this with your other chemicals, or malathion and 7, I know. And what you can do is, when you mix this in that solution, you have to keep it agitated, because this is going to try to sink to the bottom. Also, if you're using a 2 gallon or 1 gallon sprayer, and you have your nozzle set for a spray, you're going to have to open that nozzle up more, because this will try to plug it up. So, and you're not going to be actually spraying a spray. You will actually be spraying a stream. This is malathion. It's just one of my favorites. I'll say it like that. It kills insects. I usually mix it, and you can use it at 80% petal fall. That means when the blooms have lost 80% of the petals, you can spray this at that time. I do not use it then, though. You can use it for the plum curculio. It can be mixed with the Captan. Okay. The insecticidal soap, I've never used it. It it removes the external skeleton of your insects. It'll dehydrate. One thing I'm going to do this year is I'm going to start or try to use sulfur, a dusting sulfur. I got it from Frobert's in Alvin. It is an insecticide and a fungicide that the old timers used to use. And I'm going to try it this year. Okay, there is out there a complete fruit tree spray that you can start spraying at petal fall if you want to. It has malathion in it, 7, and captan. If you're going to use this from this container, you want to shake it very, very well because it'll layer in here also. And then when you get in your sprayer, keep it agitated also. Now, when it comes to spraying, these are dormant buds. At this point here, you could use dormant oil if you wanted to as a spray solution. See, I've got maybe, I don't do it, but there are recommendations out there. Velvet tip, this is starting to turn velvet. It's a featherlight. You can use a fungicide, maybe, if you want to, but I don't. I try to use the least chemical, the most effective way possible. This is pink bud. When those blooms showing all that pink, a fungicide is recommended. An if you had history of cat facing on your trees, before it got to this point, I would probably use an insecticide in case you have a insect out there that's kind of like hangs around every year, then I would want to get rid of it. But if you're going to use an insecticide, you might as well use a fungicide too. And this right here, now when the plums bloom and they're white, that's popcorn, it's not pink bud. Now these are full bloom, okay? A fungicide, maybe, okay? If you have a history of a lot of fungicide problems, you may want to use a fungicide at that particular time, but I don't, okay? And full bloom, and this is the Tropic Snow, and when you look at that, you can tell that's full bloom. Okay, 80% petal fall. When 80% of the blooms on your tree look like this, that's petal fall. If you were real serious about this, you would probably use a fungicide, which could be either one, and an insecticide at that time, maybe. But here again, I usually don't. Split shuck. This is when that little peach has that calyx on it. And I got fungicide, insecticide. I use it at this time. Now, let's say it like this. A fungicide is a must at this point. Insecticide, if you're scouting for plum curculio and you know you don't have plum curculio or other insects, you may not use the insecticide. Such as if you lived over in Crystal Beach where there is no plum curculio or hasn't been, you may not need that insecticide. Spray preparation. Okay. This is the complicated part. Read the label in the store. When you take your chemical home, I usually put it in a plastic bucket because I've known of people that set it up on the shelf, the container leaks and you got this malathion running down the wall and the toolbox and everything, and it's hard to get rid of. We need some safety gear. We need some kind of goggles, at least, a hat. We want long shirt, long sleeve shirt, long pants. I wear rubber boots, okay? And I use rubber gloves. We want the water. We want the pH of the water to be just below 7 because some chemicals, if the pH is too high, you neutralize the chemical. And it's not any good. We want to taste. If we've never done this, we want to test our sprayer for leaks. I suggest if you're in a neighborhood where you got fences and stuff like that, with water, you spray one time. And that is to learn the airflow and the turbulence that the fences create. Okay? We're going to test our sprayer for leaks. We want the wind at almost nothing. Now, when you're spraying, if there's any wind, the larger the drops, the safer you are. If you have a high wind, you don't want any spray. As the wind goes up, the larger drops, they don't travel as far. At dusk in the evening, the bees go home. I used to say the children go home, but they don't even go outside anymore. Now, shake the chemical very well, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to add the water to my sprayer, almost all of it. I'm going to add about, I usually with a 2-gallon sprayer, I add about 2 tablespoons of vinegar, 5% acidity, a little bit of ivory. I will mix that. Now, if you've never used this mixture before, what you do is you spray this on cabbage leaf, broccoli, and see if this chemical or mixture sheens on the leaves. If it doesn't sheen, you need more ivory. Once you find out the right mixture there, then you take your chemical, mix it very well, add it to your sprayer, keep it agitated with the proper clothing on, and spray. And stay upwind. Okay. When you get through, if there's any left, put it out there on the ground, on the yard, not dump it, just kind of spray it out there, because the sunlight and everything will break it down the next day. There's a re-entry date that you can go back in there depending on what chemicals you use. And you know those pets are in the house, right? Because you don't want those pets out there because they'll bring that stuff inside. I usually go back in the garage. I'm going to get rid of my clothing and everything. If you're using leather shoes and you got chemical on your leather shoes and it's drenched, just go ahead and throw them away. That's why I use rubber boots. If you get it on your clothing, I would definitely wash it someplace else before it ever went in the house. I'm going to shower. I'll wash my clothes and rubber boots. Now I've got everything cleaned up. I'm inside and it's probably dark at this time. And then I'm going to write it in my log that I've done this. Now, spraying. At split shut, okay, my normal in the past is or was at split shut. When you have that little bitty peach with the calyx around it, I would spray at that time. And then I would figure that I'm going to spray this next time in 12 days. I use a fungicide and an insecticide. Now, I'm shooting for 12 days, but with the wind around here sometimes, on the 10th day, I'm going to try to spray. With some of these chemicals, you can spray up to 7 days of harvest and read the label. Okay, shot hole, like I said, this is a repeat. During long periods of high humidity, additional spraying may be needed. I do not use Roundup. Originally, Roundup on the label said you could use your Roundup under your peach trees up until I think 60 or 90 days after they bloomed. And then that was changed. And then it was, last time I read it, it said if the tree is under 3 years old, don't even use it around your peaches. Now, what happens is you spray it and the ground is hot, the fumes come up and it gets into your leaves and then it can kill your tree. I consider a peach tree too valuable to use Roundup around it. And like I said, this year I'm going to try to use a sulfur dust. Okay. When it comes to the mulch, I don't want any oak material around there because there is a root rot that can affect your tree that can come through in oak. When it comes to spraying, I'm going to spray near darkness when the bees and the kids go home. The stink bug timing, most likely you won't have any stink bugs prior to the 1st of June or in there. When I was doing a lot of spraying, or I also knew that I could buy something called 7XLR Plus that worked on stink bugs and was approved for peaches. Here again, a high spot in the yard is really not drainage. And when I say thin, the larger fruit's what we want. Now, I have known people that tell me, say, oh, my peach tree produced 1 peach last year. They were proud of it. Okay? If it's the wrong variety, Either buy another one or regraft it. If you're going to regraft, you find somebody that's got a tree in the area that produces what you want, and you could do that. Now on hay, some good clean hay that they feed the horses, quite often they use a weed killer called Grazon. If you take the horse manure, compost it, put it around your garden and your trees, the Grazon is still active, and your peach tree is a broadleaf weed to the Grazon. If you have your tree growing and you have a limb that's, you'd like to have it in a different position or something like that, what you can do in about March or earlier, tie that limb so you don't girdle it in the position that you want it, and leave it there until August or later, and it will probably stay in that position. I say shoot first. It's like a shotgun. We know the fungus is coming. We're going to spray for it. When it comes to fire ants are good and bad. If the fire ants are not up against the tree, I don't mind them being there because I feel like they're eating something else out there. Now, if you have them around your tree and they're irritating you, you irritate them with a water hose several times a day, tear that mound down. You do that several times and they're going to go someplace else. If they have a little board kind of leaning, they would like to have a kind of a protected place like we would. Okay. Now, I used to say chickens, hogs, and frogs take care of all your plum curculio. And back on the old homestead, that's probably the way it happened because hogs were running out. Now, this is our goal. Now, if you look in here, you see that white stake. That means, and on the right, you see this is under netting because it works very well.